We've been asking viewers what's on their mind before this election. What do they want to know from these candidates? Larry Jacobs from the University of Minnesota Humphrey School joins us now.
Thank you so much, Esme. We've had a lot of questions from viewers. One is from Ron, who's sick and tired of America being at war for a dozen years. And Ron is wondering what can be done about that. He asked Senator Franken, what would you do about the ISIS threat?
Senator Franken?
Well, ISIS is a barbaric group, and we need to degrade and destroy ISIS. So I voted to train and arm the moderate rebels in Syria, with some trepidation about how successful that can be. I have supported the president's bombing in Syria, as well, obviously, as in Iraq. ISIS doesn't observe those borders, and so I don't think we have to either. When we go back to Congress, we will debate and vote on an authorization to use military force to okay this bombing. It'll be, I think, a much more narrowly defined AUMF, authorization to use military force.
Do you support the president's actions? Has he been a leader in this area? Has he done enough? And Mr. McFadden says that you've been missing in action. You haven't done enough to stop the terrorist recruiting right here in Minnesota. What about that?
Well, okay. As soon as I got to the Senate in July of 2009, a little late, one of the first things I did was get briefings from the FBI, both in Washington and in St. Paul, on the recruitment that was going on at the time in our community from Shabab. And I met with community leaders, imams, Kajob, which is an organization that tries to get youth to make better choices, including not doing this.
Okay.
I met with law enforcement in Minnesota. I am on record as pressing the Secretary of Homeland Security in judiciary hearings on this. I'm on record as pressing the director of the FBI on this in judiciary hearings. I have worked with the community, have worked with law enforcement. We got that kind of recruitment down. Then, when it became clear that ISIS had recruited about a dozen, I wrote a letter to DOJ saying, I want you to double down on what you did to limit the ISIS or the Shabab
Senator,
recruitment, and they have. They've started a new program here.
So
there
he's
are
done a lot.
resources coming in because of that.
He's done a lot, he says.
This has been going on for a long time. Once again, the world has become a more dangerous place. I hear about safety and security from people all the time. If you want to talk directly about Minnesota being the #1 recruitment area for terrorists in the country, that concerns me, and that concerns Minnesotans. And this has been going on for a long time. Al Franken said it's been going on since 2008 with Al-Shabaab, more recently with ISIS. It wasn't until there's estimates that 10 to 40 Minnesotans are over fighting with ISIS. It wasn't until there were reports that there were 2 Minnesotans that were killed. And I called for a revocation of passports from people that go over and fight with the terrorist organization, and I held a press conference to say that. And this was after talking to community leaders in East Africa. Then Al Franken comes out at that point in time and says, he writes a letter to the Department of Justice. I think that was a meager effort. But let me go back about when you talk about ISIS, because they are barbarians, I agree with you. I cannot stress strongly enough how disappointed I have been, Al, with President Obama's foreign policy or lack of it, and your support of it. This leading from behind doesn't work. Keep in mind, this was a president that came into office that said, I'm just going to sit down with the leaders of North Korea and Iran and we'll work everything else, and Venezuela. And that's not been the case. The world is a more dangerous place today because we've not shown leadership. This is the president that came back from vacation after there were 2 beheadings of journalists and said, we don't have a strategy for Syria. That's not acceptable.
Well, Senator Franken, and let me ask you this. I mean, the president said in 2012 there would be, if Syria used chemical weapons, a red line would be crossed and there would be U.S. action in retaliation. That never happened. Experts point to that and a series of missteps in Syria and also not leaving a force in Iraq in 2011 as being part of the reason that ISIS has grown so quickly and become so strong. You have supported the president in his foreign policy. I mean, do you feel that the president and yourself and those who have supported him are to blame for the rise of ISIS?
Well, in 2013, when Assad used chemical weapons, you know, I said at the beginning that I thought that the president should use force. No, Mr. McFadden talks about leading from behind. In the first 10 months of his campaign, there was not a word about foreign policy, about terrorism, about public health. Then, when Assad used chemical weapons, every Republican candidate for the Senate was asked by Minnesota Public Radio what choice they would make, what they would do. Everyone answered, but Mr. McFadden. He ducked. And the reason he ducked was because it was a difficult political decision.
I didn't duck, and let me answer that question. I absolutely, if I was president of the United States...
But you didn't answer that question. I actually looked up.
Every
all the other candidates responded.
We get asked questions, Esme and Pat, all the time on issues. Sometimes we answer, sometimes we don't. It might have been a situation that I was at a kid's hockey game, but let me tell you
late to the game.
Let me tell you. Well, but I'm in the game, and I'll tell you exactly what I would have done. As soon as you draw a red line in the sand and it's crossed, I would have had bombers into Syria immediately. Question done. Period.
This is very funny.
No, it's
because
not very.
This was a huge issue at the time. This was, you know, this dominated the news. This is when you're asked about the issue facing the country, and right then and there, that was the issue, and it was a difficult decision. That's the job. You have to make choices in this job.
Here's the issue.
Make
Benghazi,
it in real time.
We had an ambassador that was murdered in Benghazi, and the president did nothing, and you supported that, and the world watched. Excuse me, Al. Then what happened is the president drew a red line in the sand in Syria, which was crossed, and he did nothing, and the world watched, and you supported him. So it's no wonder that we have a situation that's happened in the Ukraine or in Gaza or in Syria and Iraq. The world is a much more dangerous place today because we have not had any leadership.
Seems like a fair point.
You've supported this president 97% of the time. You've been connected at the hip. You're a rubber stamp for his policy.
We'll talk 97% next. A brief response, Senator. We have to go on.
At the time, I was asked on NPR what my policy was right away. As soon as Assad did this, I said the president...
What should have we done in Benghazi? What should have we done?
Hang on. Let me answer this. This is a job where you have to answer questions in real time, where you have to make choices in real time. You can't take cheap shots from the bleachers. There was nothing, not a word of his on foreign policy for the first 10 months. Nothing on his website, nothing that he sent, no speeches on it, no press releases.
Al, you talk about diverting questions real time. I just watched Pat and Esme ask you 3 times whether you support a travel ban from West Africa, and you diverted it time and time again. People are seeing here live across Minnesota how you act, and that's not acceptable. We can do so much better.
We have to take a break.